Well, good evening, everybody. We thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I'm going to open up in prayer. And before I do that, I hope everybody was blessed with the first lesson and enjoyed the introduction of Apostolic Church history. Lord, we come before you this evening. We ask that you be with us, Lord, that you would open up our minds, our hearts, our souls, our spirits, Lord, that we would take in everything you would have for us, and that this class would be a blessing. And we just thank you, Jesus, for all that you do for us in your precious name, Lord. Amen. And here is Professor Roop.
All right. Thank you, Sister Gretchen. Yeah, minimize participants. Okay. Well, we stopped last time at the Acts chapter 15, verse 39. We had apostolic contention. They just had a big church conference to figure out what they're going to do with the Gentiles coming in the church, because Cornelius's household were 100% Gentiles. And then they had some Greeks come in at the revival in Antioch, Syria. But then Paul and Barnabas went in south, which is South Turkey today, but it was Asia Minor back then. And they converted entire churches of Gentiles. And so the apostles for the last 10 years were wringing their hands over, should we make these Gentiles Jews? Do they have to keep the festivals? Do they have to be circumcised? What will we do with them? What's our doctrine? How we go forward? They were really wringing their hands over that. They couldn't make a decision. They finally called a church conference in Jerusalem, where all the apostles and elders and anybody else who had an opinion came, and the Bible says it was contentious meeting, meaning they yelled at each other, probably threw a few chairs around. And they had to decide what to do. Gentiles, they finally figured it out. They just basically told the Gentiles, you can stay Gentiles, you don't have to become Jews. You just stay away from idols and things strangled and blood and things that would upset Jews, because most of Christianity at this time was Jewish. So they're trying to be diplomatic and keep the peace. So they just gave them a few rules. Read that, Acts chapter 15. All right. So we just had the first church conference. Here's a little map of church growth. As you can see, the dark areas were probably areas started first. Now you got to remember, the plan of salvation was given on the day of Pentecost, where many Jews were in Jerusalem for that festival. It's one of the required festivals Jews had to attend. So a lot of Jews from around the Mediterranean here had come to Jerusalem. And I'm sure many of them were obedient to the plan of salvation, were saved, and learned the new doctrine and learned about Jesus Christ. And when they went back home around the Mediterranean, they took that doctrine with them and they started churches. In fact, today I was reading about the writings of Roman historian and a couple of Roman historians, and the Emperor Claudius, and how he mentioned Jews and Christians in Rome in 41 AD. 41 AD. That's when he mentioned them, but they had been there before. They had been there. They didn't just arrive 41 AD. They had been there already. So they were there earlier than 41 AD, and Christ was crucified around 33 AD. It was the day of Pentecost, around 33 AD. So about 8 years after the church began, there was already a church in Rome. So it apparently had been there a while. And so not only had a church in Rome right here, but she had churches there and there and there, where these Jews went back home and started teaching that new doctrine they just learned. So the church was mainly here, Israel, and now Antioch. Antioch is right here. That's where the big revivals are going on. Jerusalem, Samaria, Antioch. And of course, Paul and Barnabas preached throughout Cyprus here. And then right around here. And so this area is pretty saturated with Christians by now, quite a bit, probably in Egypt as well. So it was really spotty at the beginning, and the church would grow through Asia Minor and through North Africa here. And that's because most transportation back then, or at least the best transportation, was by ship. Because ship, you just a lot easier. You just get on the boat, pay a little passage money, and you can just sit there on the ship and watch the land pass by, which is a lot better than riding a horse or camel or even walking. So people, if they could afford it, they went by ship. And of course, a ship would go to these port cities, right? And they would get off and preach the gospel. Yeah, their ship, go in their port and preach the gospel, and so on and so forth. So church kind of grew a little spotty, but pretty soon it's starting to come into grace here in North Africa. So this area here, Israel, they knew about monotheism, which is the belief in one God, because Israel always believed in one God. So all the people around here were very familiar with that. And so when Christianity began, and they also believed in one God, which is apostolic, they clashed with the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Roman world, who were polytheistic. Polytheistic. That means they believed in many gods. And so these areas of the world that were polytheistic, when they encountered Christians who believed in one God, or Jews who believed in one God, they thought they were very arrogant. Said, how can you believe your God created the whole earth? Well, what about our gods? We got 100 gods. So that was their attitude. It was a big cultural clash that took place back in that day. All right. So the apostles all went out and preached. So what happened to them? Well, let's go over that. The apostle Andrew, he was born around 5 to 10 AD in Galilee. He's reported to be, he's martyred in 60 AD. Andrew is a Greek name, which is interesting. He was born in Galilee, but he has a Greek name. So one of his parents might have been Greek. Or if both parents were Jewish, then they were Greek and Jews, meaning they're Jews who had adopted the Greek culture. And there were many of those in those days. Because the Greeks, if you were in business, or certainly a merchant, you would certainly need to know Greek. So the apostle Andrew, he basically preached all the way around the Black Sea. He went to Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Cyprus. He was shipwrecked on Cyprus. That's why he preached there. Remember I told you about people taking boats? It was the best transportation, but it was also kind of dangerous. Apostle Paul gets a lot of credit for being shipwrecked on Malta, but Apostle Andrew got shipwrecked on Cyprus. But the Black Sea is a very large sea, and he basically walked around the Black Sea and preached in all those lands around the Black Sea. He was crucified on an X-shaped cross, now called the St. Andrew's Cross. He was crucified in Greece. So he had a long and fruitful ministry. All right, the Apostle Thomas. He was born in Galilee. He died in 72 AD in India. And that's where he spent most of his ministry. He started 7 churches on the southern tip of India. And in fact, even today, the southern tip of India is mostly Christian. He was in India from 52 to 72 AD. So he was in India for 20 years preaching and starting these churches. Some sources said he also made trips to Indonesia and China. And that's very, very believable because the southern tip of India, they did a lot of trading by ship, and that's probably where Apostle Thomas, that's why he got there to begin with. And so it was very easy for him to catch a ship going even further east. So he probably did go to Indonesia on his way to China. He didn't stay in China. He came back to India. He started 3 churches on the western tip of India, and then he started 3 churches on the eastern tip of India. And then he tried to start a church right there in the middle, in between them, inside India. And he upset one of the local kings, and the king had him martyred. So that's what happened to Apostle Thomas. There is an interesting story. There's several witnesses of some Catholic monks. Or trying to remember what kind of monks they were, but they reported that the local Indians in the South American country of Paraguay reported that they had seen the Apostle Thomas in Paraguay preaching to them. It's an interesting story. It's a centuries old story. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's an interesting story if you ever want to look it up. I don't believe it, but anyway. All right. Apostle Jude. He was born in Galilee, died in Armenia or Lebanon, or Beirut, Lebanon. Nobody's sure. He preached in Israel, Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Armenia. Now, Armenia back in that day was actually quite a large country. Not so today, but back then it was. I'll show you a map later on. Apostle Simon, called Simon the Zealot. Remember Simon the Zealot? He was born in Galilee. He died in 65 AD in Armenia, either Armenia, Persia, or Syria. Nobody's really sure where he was martyred, but we're pretty sure about the date for some reason, where he was martyred at. But he had a long, fruitful mission. Tradition says that he was the 2nd bishop of Jerusalem, and church historians also say that. So he preached in Egypt, Persia, Armenia, and modern-day Lebanon. Some rumors have it, some stories have it, he might have went to Britain to preach. He might have went all the way to Great Britain to preach. That's just rumors right now. So, all right. Apostle Matthew. Not too much known as about Apostle Matthew. Not a whole lot is known about him. He was born in Galilee, and he died in Ethiopia. Story has it he was speared by 3 men while he was preaching in Ethiopia. But that's all the information we know about the Apostle Matthew. All right, Apostle James, son of Alphaeus, born in Galilee, died in 60 AD in Jerusalem. He was the second leader in the early church, Acts chapter 15. He's the one who stood up and made a decision about the Gentiles. The apostles were arguing and bickering among themselves. James said enough. He stood up. He gave his judgment. The Gentiles can be Gentiles. They don't have to become Jews. And that was a very, very important decision. And Apostle James made it. So he's basically the leader of the church in Jerusalem. He basically stayed around Jerusalem. All right, Apostle Bartholomew. Born in Galilee, he died in Armenia. Reportedly skinned alive and beheaded. My understanding, he was skinned alive, and when that didn't kill him, they decided to cut his head off, which probably did the trick. But anyway, he preached in India, Ethiopia, Persia, Iraq, and Armenia. But he did preach in India. He went and joined up actually with the Apostle Thomas and met Thomas there and preached. I guess he was looking for him. He preached in India for a while, not 20 years like Thomas did, but he did stay probably 1 or 2 years at least. And then before he came back. So Apostle Bartholomew had a very, very big ministry. All right, Apostle Peter. We all know a lot about Apostle Peter. Rock of the church, had the keys to the kingdom. Kind of like Jesus' right-hand man. He was born in Galilee, crucified in Rome upside down. Preached in Israel, Syria, Persia, Iraq, Turkey, Greece, and Rome. Apostle Peter preached in a bigger geographical area than any other apostle. In fact, modern day Iraq and Iran claim him as their father apostle that started all the churches in that area. So they all claim Peter started all the churches there. Peter wrote 2 of the New Testament books, 1 Peter and 2 Peter. Of course, I just said he had keys to the kingdom given by Jesus Christ himself. First was to the Jews in Israel, and then he went to Samaria, where were half Jews and half Gentiles. And then he opened up the keys to the kingdom to Cornelius and his household, which were 100% Jews. Why Peter had to let all these ethnic groups in, I really don't know. I guess because Peter had the keys and was the rock of the church. I don't know, but he did. He, like I just said, he evangelized more territory than any other apostle. Patron saint of Iraq and Iran. There you go. And he wasn't in Rome very long before they crucified him. Probably should have went somewhere else, I guess. All right, Apostle John. How about Apostle John? Born in Galilee, died in 90 and 100 AD in Turkey. He lived the longest. Of all the apostles, he lived the longest, and he wasn't martyred. He died an old man in his sleep. They tried to martyr him. He tried to kill him. They threw him in boiling oil, and when the boiling oil wouldn't kill him, they shipped him off to an island of Patmos and left him there. Exiled on Patmos. He wrote 5 books of the New Testament. He wrote the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd Johns, and he wrote a book of Revelation. Now, the Gospel of John and Revelation, those are long books. The other books he wrote were pretty short, but he wrote more words of the New Testament than all other apostles. Paul wrote more books, but John wrote more words because his Gospel and Book of Revelation are long books. He died peacefully as a very old man. The Apostle Mark, or John Mark. He's born in Cyrene. He died in 68 AD in Alexandria, Egypt. And he died by being dragged to death behind horses. He preached in Syria, Turkey, Israel, and Egypt. He started a large church in Alexandria, Egypt. Very, very large church. He didn't convict everybody because some of them killed him. So he wrote the Gospel of Mark. He wrote the Gospel of Mark. And Barnabas and Paul were, he also caused some problems in the book of Acts where Barnabas, Paul, and Mark went to Asia Minor to preach. And as soon as they got to Asia Minor, Mark decided he wanted to go back to Jerusalem. So he he didn't abandon them because Apostle Paul had a large group of people. So he rubbed Paul the wrong way. And then that was one of the things why Barnabas and Paul broke up after the first church conference in about 51 AD, is because Barnabas wanted to take Mark again. And it turns out that Paul was wrong because Mark turned out to be a great apostle. He eventually went to Alexandria, Egypt, started a large church there, and it was very successful. You gotta be patient with people, You gotta be patient. All right, Apostle Matthias. Remember Matthias? He's the one that took the place of Judas Iscariot that betrayed Jesus and hung himself. All the apostles were in the upper room, and they wanted the 12 apostles instead of 11. So they picked a group that had been with Jesus from the very beginning, from his baptism. And basically they threw dice and picked the Apostle Matthias. Anyway, Matthias was born in Judea. That's right, not Galilee, but Judea. He died in 80 AD in Jerusalem or Georgia. So he lived a long time and had a very, very long, fruitful ministry. He was a follower of Jesus from his baptism all the way to the resurrection. So the 12 apostles were certainly not the only ones following Jesus around. He had a lot of people following him around. When Jesus wanted 70 people to go out and preach, he had no problem picking out 70. So, and Matthias might have been one of those 70. And so the apostles were his inner groups, Jesus' inner group, but there's certainly a very large outer group following Jesus around too. So he preached in Israel, Ethiopia, Turkey, Caspian Sea area, and Georgia. So he really got around. I mean, from Ethiopia to the Caspian Sea, he covered a lot of territory. Church tradition says he was stoned to death, either in Jerusalem or Georgia. Nobody's really sure. But by that time, 80 AD, he was a very old man. So. Apostle Luke, of course, we know him as the wrote the book of Acts. So he was born in Antioch, Syria. That's right, Antioch, Syria, way up there. He died in 84 AD in Greece. And yes, so he lived a very long time too. He had a very long, fruitful mission. Epiphanes states that Luke was one of the 70. So we have someone, one of the church brethren, who states that Luke was definitely one of the 70. So a physician. So he was very smart. He's a doctor, so he's very smart. He was a companion of Peter for quite a long time. And then after the first church conference, he went with Paul. We're not sure why he went with Paul, why he made the change. Maybe he liked Paul better. Maybe he liked Paul's viewpoint of the Gentiles more than Peter did. So anyway, he made that change from Peter to Paul. He wrote the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. Both are very large books. So he wrote a quarter of the New Testament. Yeah, Luke and Acts are big books, so it takes up a quarter of the New Testament. He died by being hung from an olive tree. So that's how he was martyred. And I don't have it here, but he died in Greece. He died in Greece. I'll fix that. All right. Apostle Paul, born in Tarsus, Turkey. He died in Rome by being beheaded. And that's because he was a Roman citizen, and he was afforded luxury of being beheaded, which is a quick and easy death, while the axe is sharp. He preached in Israel, Syria, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, and Rome. And I guess I should have put Malta down there because he got shipwrecked there. So, preached on Mars Hill to the Greek philosophers. And when he did that, he kind of opened up Christianity to the Greek and Roman worlds. And we'll get more into that later on. He was stoned, shipwrecked, whipped, imprisoned, tried in courts, and even started a riot. As you can see, Apostle Paul was a type A personality type. So that's just who he was. He wrote 13 books in the New Testament. They're all short books, but he wrote a lot of them. And he wrote more books in number than any other apostle. He basically wrote books correcting people, or encouraging people. In the book of Romans, there's a ton of doctrine in that book. Okay, so we heard a lot about Armenia, the apostles going to Armenia. Back in the apostles' day, Armenia was a very large country. As you can see the map here, it was a very, very big country. Now today, Armenia today is only this little sliver of country right here. Just a little sliver. It's a real small country today, real tiny. But back in Jesus' day, in the apostles' day, it was a very large country. So that's why when Armenia is mentioned a lot, it is because it was such a big country in that day. Okay. So, Christianity started getting into Asia Minor, Greece. Early on, there was a church in Rome. itself. How did the Romans view the early church? Hmm. So, what is a Christian? If you grew up in a Roman polytheistic world, how would you view a Christian? It may take some imagination. You could probably come up with a response without much thought. Chances are you would say something like, it's someone who has trusted Jesus as the Lord, as Savior and Lord. But what if you lived in a world in which only a small percentage of the population had ever heard of Jesus? Think about that. In the first few decades of Christian faith, followers of Jesus struggled to help people around them understand what is really meant to be Christian. From the Roman perspective, Christians were simply one or more Jewish sects. The Jewish faith was recognized throughout the Roman Empire, so this association protected Christians in many areas. Yet, according to some Jewish leaders, Christians were renegades who had abandoned the ancient and venerable Jewish faith. Christians claimed that their faith fulfilled the Jewish law, even calling themselves the Israel of God. At the same time, as Christianity expanded among non-Jews, Christians' practices increasingly separated them from their Jewish faith that Jesus and the first apostles had practiced. By 100 AD, the Christian and Jewish faiths were recognized as two separate groups. And probably earlier than that, probably at least 70 AD. So Jewish synagogues had excluded Christians, and the Roman Empire had engaged in widespread persecution of Christians. How did those who claimed Jesus as their Messiah come to constitute a distinct group? Well, the answer can't be confined to any one event. Yet two fires, one in Jerusalem and one in Rome, contributed to this separation in a very critical way. The first was a fire in Rome. In the midsummer of AD 64, Rome burned. Flames ravaged the city for 6 days. When the smoke cleared, 10 of Rome's 14 districts had been reduced to rubble. Nero, the Roman emperor, was several miles away when the fire began. When he heard the news, Nero rushed back to Rome. During the fire, he organized firefighting efforts. After the fire, thousands of refugees stayed in his gardens. Yet, as the rebuilding of Rome began, many citizens blamed Nero for the tragedy. According to one rumor, Nero had ordered his servants to start the fire. Nero torched Rome, the rumor claimed, so he could rebuild the city according to his own whims. Later, rumors insisted that Nero had played his harp while Rome burned. In fact, the fire probably began by accident in an oil warehouse. But this probable fact was quickly lost amid raging gossip and rumors. Nero responded to the rumors by lavishing gifts on the citizens of Rome. Nothing helped. In desperation, Nero blamed the fire on an unpopular minority group. Yep, you know it, the Christians. Nero became the first emperor to recognize publicly that Christianity was a different religion. So that was 64 AD. And he began immediately to persecute this faith. One Roman historian described the persecution this way: some were dressed in furs and killed by dogs. Others were crucified or burned alive to light the night. The Apostle Peter was martyred in Rome during Nero's persecution. According to ancient tradition, Peter didn't believe he was worthy to die like a savior. So the big fisherman asked to be crucified upside down. Roman authorities also arrested the Apostle Paul, since it was illegal to crucify a Roman citizen. Paul probably died by beheading by the sword. In some ways, Nero's false accusation made sense. Christians did claim that a great inferno would accompany the end of the world. We read that in Revelation chapter 20, verse 9. Some overly eager Christians may have seen a certain sign of Christ's return in Rome's reduction to rubble. Christians also rejected all other gods. Christians believed in only one God, monotheism, the God of Israel revealed in Jesus Christ. This belief seemed arrogant to the Romans. Most Romans covered all their spiritual bases by sacrificing to many gods, known and sometimes unknown, as we read in Acts chapter 17. They even offered incense to dead emperors. As one emperor died, he joked, "I think I'm becoming a god now." No, you didn't. Yet Romans didn't sacrifice simply for their own sakes. They sacrificed for the sake of their empire. Numerous sacrifices, they believed, secured divine assistance for their government. To deny the existence of any divinity was, at best, unpatriotic, and at worst, perilous to the security of their empire. Also, Christian customs were widely misunderstood. When they described their worship, Christians talked about consuming the body and blood of Christ at their love feasts. Believers called one another brothers and sisters, terms used in Egypt to refer to sexual partners. Alone, either of these practices might have struck the Romans as odd. Combined with the Christian conviction that Christians follow the only true God, such practices convinced many citizens that Christianity was a dangerous cult. Romans couldn't quell their concerns by attending a church service. When early Christians shared the Lord's Supper, they wouldn't even let non-believers watch. Without first-hand information, Romans began to accuse Christians falsely of cannibalism and incest. And Christians challenged the social order of the day. Paul had declared, I'll quote him, "There is neither Jew or Greek, there is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female." Paul says that in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. In other words, every person matters, whatever his or her social status. Early Christians lived out Paul's words. The result offended the Romans. The church challenged the entire structure of Roman society by welcoming the lower classes and by valuing every human life. The laws of Rome prevented slaves from inheriting property. The customs of the empire treated women as lesser beings. If a Roman father didn't want his child, he left the infant alone in a field to die. Christians defied such social structures by adopting unwanted infants and by welcoming slaves and women as equal inheritors of God's grace. So, during that day, one half of the Roman Empire was enslaved. One half. And here they comes these Christians saying that free or slave, you're a child of God, and Jesus Christ died for you. Well, that was to the Romans, that was outlandish and dangerous. They didn't want any slave uprisings. They elevated women as equals. That was also unheard of anywhere in that world. Women were never considered equal in that time period. But here comes the Christians saying everybody's equal. Free, slave, women, men. They believed in one God that created the whole universe. The Romans said, what about our gods? They considered them very arrogant. They refused to burn incense to the emperors as gods. And so they saw them as traitors. The Christians had to worship in secret because Christianity was illegal. They a lot of times they went out in the woods and had church service in the woods. The Romans thought that was kind of creepy. They thought it was kind of creepy. Like the early church, they had potluck meals together. They fed each other so that nobody went hungry. And they were called love feasts because they came together to love each other, just like Christ loved the church. But Romans misunderstood that as kind of a sexual thing. They called each other brother and sister, and that was sexual. Lord's Supper is done in secret. Yeah, that's not the case today. Any visitor to any church, if they're having communion, they can witness it. But back in that day, for some reason, it was too sacred for non-believers to witness. Of course, equality for everybody, and they welcome the poor. Back in that day, if you were poor, you were looked down upon. You were one step away from slavery. So, because back then, if you didn't pay your bills, well, if you couldn't pay with money, then you would have to pay it in work, and you were made a slave for a while. So Christians really upset the Roman social order of the day. They also took in unwanted infants. If family had a baby and they didn't want the baby, they just abandoned it out in the field. And that still goes on today. Sister Gretchen was a missionary to Guatemala for 3 years. And Guatemala today, that's what they do. If they don't have a baby they don't want, they take it to a cornfield and abandon it. Well, the children home there are very observant, and if they see a baby abandoned, they go get it. Well, the early Christians back then did the same thing. They were taking all these abandoned children and raising them. And Romans they couldn't understand that. And Christianity was a brand new religion. They respected the Jews because the Jews' religion was thousands of years old. It was ancient. The Romans respected ancient religions, religions that stuck around for a while. Christianity was a brand new religion, and so they really didn't get the same respect from Romans that the Jews got. So the Christians, so new, but they, unlike the Jews, they had no sacrifices, no temples, no sacred cities. So as a result, Christians seemed unusual, unsafe, and unpleasant to their Roman neighbors. And so the first fire, the one that ravaged Rome in 64 AD, highlighted habits of life and faith that caused Christianity to be unpopular among the Romans. There was another fire, this time it's going to be in Jerusalem, that helped to solidify the distinction between Christian and Jewish faiths. So now it's time for Jerusalem to burn. The Romans tolerated the Jewish faith because of its ancient roots, but the Romans rarely showed any real respect for the Jewish people. Around AD 50, for example, thousands of Jews were celebrating their sacred Passover. A Roman fortress towered over the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Suddenly, one guard lifted up his robe and bent over indecently. He turned his backside towards the Jews and, in the words of the Jewish Roman historian Josephus, made a noise as indecent as his posture. In the riot that followed, as many as 30,000 women and men may have died. 30,000, that's a lot of people. A new Roman leader, a man named Florius, arrived in Judea in 64 AD. For 2 years, Florius flagrantly insulted the Jews. When several Jewish leaders demanded that Florius stop stealing from the temple, Florius sent his soldiers into the market. Their orders? Slaughter and steal. Before the day ended, 3,600 Jews were dead. Seeds of anger towards Rome had germinated for years. Now they blossomed into open revolt. In a few weeks, bands of Jewish rebels violently overwhelmed Roman strongholds in Jerusalem and Galilee. So Emperor Nero knew that to maintain his hold on the corner of the Roman Empire is necessary to stop a rebellion. So Nero died before he could stop the rebellion, but he did gather 60,000 troops, and his replacement, Vespasian, also the one who conquered Jerusalem. And at least 1 million Jews died. According to church history, the Christian leadership was tipped off that the attack would begin by prophecy and told to go to a little town called Pella, which is on the other side of the Jordan River. And that's where they went. And actually many of the Christians were actually saved that day. So after the revolt, the religious landscape of the Roman Empire shifted. Many people wanted to make certain that they weren't associated with odd religious sects. During the last half of the century AD, this shift would lead eventually to rejection and widespread persecution of Christians. So after these 2 fires, Christians became politically incorrect. So here's the Roman Empire in 50 AD. So you had this Eastern cultural and Western cultural divides that took place. people in eastern part of Mediterranean thought one way and the western part thought another way. That's because they were raised differently in different cultures, and so they just thought about things differently. And the church would eventually be split, east and west. So, clash of cultures, Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity. And we're still divided today, actually. You go to the east, there's a Greek Orthodox, there's a Russian Orthodox, the Ukrainian Orthodox, the Syrian Orthodox, different flavors of Christianity, very different in how they look, how they do things, their culture. So the East believe very easily in one God. Apostolic doctrine is belief in one God. That's Deuteronomy 6:4. They were very conservative mindset, unlike the Romans. Their lifestyle is very conservative. They owned few slaves in the East. And that's because most people in the East were poor. So few slaves were actually owned in the East. Spoke mainly Aramaic. That was their language. Of the common people was Aramaic. They had a little false doctrine. Eventually they did adopt the Trinity, but most false doctrines didn't make it to the East. The western part of the empire was polytheistic. That means they believed in many gods, many gods. They had a very liberal mindset. They were more cultured, more sinful. I think because they were wealthier, they had more time on their hands to sin. So wealthier people can get into more trouble than poor people. Poor people are working all day. They don't have time to sin. So anyway, a lot more slaves were owned in the West. That's because people were richer there, especially in Italy. They spoke Greek and Latin. They didn't speak Aramaic in the West. They spoke Greek and Latin. And a cultural divide is a very, very big, big divide. A lot of false doctrine flourished in the West, and the Trinity began there, and it stayed there. It was much stronger there than in the East. So you definitely had a clash of cultures take place, and they spoke different languages. They had different ideas about things, and they just really, the two sides really didn't get along. All right. Now, Paul will go to Mars Hill and preach to Greek philosophers there. And the Greeks had a whole different educational system, a whole different mindset. And we're going to talk about that next week quite a bit. They were raised in a culture of Platoism. Platoist ethics is based on the form of the good, the unknown creator, the unknown God who created the universe, what they call the good, which is the realm where the Greek gods played and worked and flew around. And then you had the sphere of man. So under Platoism, you had three spiritual realms, a trinity of spiritual realms. Let's put it that way. How about that? Under Platoism, virtue is knowledge, And Gnosticism grew out of this whole idea of secret knowledge. And Gnosticism, we'll talk a little bit about Gnosticism. That was the first major heresy in the church, was Gnosticism. Okay, Platoism invented mathematics and also philosophy. So it was much more than religion. It covered all the sciences. And so it's 7 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and stop there. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and speak up. And most people can't make the class because it's in the middle of the night for them. So once you hear this, you can email me any questions, and I can certainly answer any questions you have by email. So with that said, we'll go ahead and call it a night, and thank you very much. God bless you.